Hello everyone and welcome back to the Retro Recall. I hope we're doing awesome. Dells. For some reason, they just continue to find their way to the Retro Recall. They must be the only computer manufacturer up here in Canada because I'm telling you, these three systems were saved from e-waste again, and they always seem to be some form factor of Dell. In today's video, we're going to go over each of these systems. I have no idea if any of these work. I have not even physically plugged them in, looked inside, nothing. Literally a couple days ago, grabbed them and moved them from the vehicle to the bench. So here we are. We're going to go over each one of these systems. We're going to find out if they work today and see what's in store. You know what? We have lots to do. As always, let's get right to it. And welcome back. Here we are with our first Dell on the bench, and this is one of those systems I have never seen this type of form factor before, this sort of case design. I've seen a lot of the others over the different videos I've done in the channel, but this is a first for me seeing this sort of design. Let me know in the comments if you've owned one of these. One thing I will say about these sort of systems from this era of Dell is that they are built very, very well, extremely well. And, you know, one of the things is that they're over-engineered is some of the comments I've read before, people saying, you know, they were just built very well. And, you know, they can handle a lot of abuse, and maybe that's one of the reasons why they've lasted and stood the test of time. You know, on top of that, the components inside widely available through the years. So here we do have a Dell Dimension 2200 in this form factor, as I said before. We have a DVD optical drive up top, just says DVD-ROM on it. I don't know if this is an extra expansion. It kind of looks like an extra expansion bay here for 3.5 inch, not 5 1/4. We do have a molded front kind of bezel for the 3.5 inch floppy drive that we have. I imagine that's just a standard floppy that is populated, that they just have the front bezel taken off of it, so you could potentially replace that. And then we have an indicator for the floppy drive access, as well as, of course, the eject button in case, in order to get the disk out. Then we have our power button, our LED for our hard disk, of course, our Dell Dimension moniker. We have down here just a little lip, again for design, but it does feel like there's some ventilation going on. We do have design for Windows XP, as well as Intel Inside Celeron case badges. Now, I mean, I don't ever just take that at face value, because these systems are old enough that you know, if other people had taken them, they could have done some upgrades to them. They might have swapped the board out. They may have swapped the CPU out. And I have come across a couple of OEM systems, or at least cases, that they've completely gutted the system and used the case, because of its form factor, to support other hardware. So on this side, we have the Dell logo. This one here is, you know, slightly embossed on the side. I mean, just kind of engraved in the side there. And referencing the case condition, it is in extremely, really good condition considering what it is. I mean, it is, again, not one dent that I see on the side. Yes, there's some surface scratches, but some of these can be buffed out pretty easily if you wanted to restore this. But it's an interesting design for sure. Again, I haven't seen this style Dell before. So you have the curvature in the front, kind of leaning towards that design. And it's kind of a shorter, not as deep as a standard ATX case would be. And along the back, we do have, well, lots of ports. So we're going to go over these. Based on what I'm seeing here, just by, you know, guessing, I would say this is more of the butterfly type case that kind of opens right up, kind of like a V. So it's going to be interesting to see here in a moment. So along the back, we just have some serial information. We do have, looks like a Kensington lock port, which is not something I see too often on an actual desktop. We do have our power supply connector fan as well, which is obviously built into the power supply. We do have our 9-pin serial, as well as our VGA and printer ports. We do have 2 PS2, 4 USB, and 3 audio jacks. As well, it looks like down here, we do have an Ethernet card installed. So, I mean, a wide array of ports. Nice to have all of these. I mean, some of these systems are still sought after because of that serial port, because not all USB to serial adapters will work for a lot of those more industrial type designs. I know newer or some of the manufacturers are coming up with some of the industrial motherboards and things like that, but some people love, if these systems are in good condition and they're cheap enough, they'll grab them just for that compatibility. So it's nice to see. Okay, let's see if we can get this cracked open and get a different camera view to see what's inside this tower. Okay, and here's the aerial view of this system, and I was incorrect in how I described this being kind of like a butterfly case. We do have our power supply that's completely in the way here, but the nice thing about Dell is that to denote these kind of user movable, accessible type designs, where it kind of denotes where you're supposed to kind of look at and to be able to access certain things. So I'm just going to pull down on this and lift this power supply out of the way because it looks like it was on hinges. There we go. So there we are. We are able to better access this system. So it's interesting to see some of these designs from Dell. So along the top, we do have our optical drive, as we mentioned earlier. We just have a standard IDE drive that's connected. And then we do have the two bays here for the 3.5-inch floppy. Or if you really wanted to, I imagine you can mount a hard disk in there as well. So as mentioned, we do have the 3.5-inch drive populated. And again, it's all ribbon cables going down to the board. We have this huge power supply connector, this ATX power supply connector that's running. Now along the back, or along the motherboard, sorry, I'm seeing that we do have all of our wonderful capacitors here. And, in this sort of era, I believe was the, quote unquote capacitor plague. I'm kind of looking to see if there's any damaged capacitors, and I'm not seeing any of them here. Now I am seeing a lot of dirt. So, I mean, that's something that definitely needs to be cleaned out and scrubbed out if we get this going. But outside of that, I'm not seeing any issues. It's a Foxconn CPU fan that's installed. I don't know if this was replaced at one point. I don't know if Dell had their own style that was on top of this or not, on the top of the heatsink, but it is showing a Foxconn CPU fan. We do have some SD memory installed. We do have 2 banks. By the looks of things, it is 128 megabytes of SD RAM that's installed in the computer that's populated. We do have, again, as I mentioned, the 2 banks. We do have 2 IDE ports on the board, as well as our floppy connector. Now, there are 2, as I mentioned, populated. One goes to the optical drive. On the other side, we are showing the hard disk here, and it is showing a Quantum Fireball. I'm just seeing if I can see the capacity of this drive. And I'm showing it as a 20 gigabyte hard disk. Now, one thing I'll call out is it has stickers all over. It says replace with compact spare. So again, probably the original hard disk had stopped working in the system, and they had replaced it with a compact hard disk that we have, an IDE hard disk. So that's installed. Okay, continuing on, we have our audio cable going up to the optical drive, which does not seem to be plugged in, actually. It's just kind of hanging out up there. We do have a pile of dirt on the motherboard, specifically around the CPU, obviously, because of the airflow kind of blowing over this direction. But we have an Intel chipset here as well. And we have 4 PCI expansion ports, so it gives you lots of expansion. No AGP, unfortunately. But at the time, you could still do some good things with the PCI. We do have a battery installed. It shows an expiry of 24, would expire this year. So that definitely would have been replaced at some point in the life of this system. And of course, we also have that NIC that was installed, the network card that we called out earlier. But I mean, overall, pretty basic board. We do have the 4 PCI slots. It wouldn't hurt to have an AGP. It's always nice to see those in these types of systems, especially if you want to upgrade the CPU or do anything like that for some of the retro games and things like that. But every system had its own place in history. Okay, so I'm going to get this swapped around, get it back on the bench, get our monitor, keyboard, and mouse set up, and see if we can get this system up and running. Okay, welcome back again, and this time we do have our keyboard, mouse, monitor set up, but a little different view this time because, as you know, Dells tend to automatically turn on when you plug in the power connector. So I've gone ahead and plugged that in, and usually what happens with a Dell is it just either turns on, turns off, and just stays dormant until you hit the power button, or it just automatically starts to post. But none of that happened. So as soon as I plugged it in, I could hear the fan come on the power supply, as well as the CPU fan, and that was it. And I noticed the front light, the power LED, was flickering very faintly, just flickering. And so I was like, okay, well, there's definitely something going on with the system where it's not coming out of that high fan mode. I just unplugged it and I plugged in my power supply tester here to show everyone what's happening, because it's quite interesting. I think there's definitely an issue with this power supply, that's for sure. So let's just plug this in and we can show everybody what's going on. If I can blindly plug it in, there we are. And you can see on the tester the fluctuation going on in this power supply. Actually, earlier this was a lot less stable, the 12 volt rail. It was going from 9 to 11 and fluctuating fairly quickly. And the same thing with the minus 12 volt rail. Both were very, very, very up and down. And this is without any load on it. Yeah, I mean, it's looking a lot better than it did earlier, probably because it's charged up the capacitors a bit. But I definitely feel like there's something going on with this power supply. And, you know, I don't want to risk any damage to the board itself. So I'm going to do is I'm going to unplug it and we're going to try a different power supply in this computer. We have a known working ATX power supply. I've tested this before on the channel in other videos, as well as with the tester. So very handy to have one of these. Again, thank you to my viewers who told me to go out and get one. Let's see what happens. Okay, so it powered up and then powered right down again. I see the light on the motherboard is powered up. This is what I would expect the behavior to be. Okay, I'm going to hit the power button on the front of the computer. And we have post. Look at that. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to go into setup real quickly just to see what this computer is. Here we are. So we do have a Dell Dimension 2200 with an Intel Celeron processor at 1.3 gigahertz. So now we know what is this, or what's in this computer. With 256K of integrated L2 cache, our BIOS version is service tag information. It is showing that the date and time is correct, which would speak to the fact that we did find that battery with the date code on it. So it is holding a charge. And so it is detecting our 3.5-inch floppy, our hard disk, and our CD-ROM reader. I mean, it doesn't differentiate between the both. Boot sequence, let's take a look. So it's set to do the hard disk first, then our IDE CD-ROM device, and our diskette drive. That's fine. Usually I do the optical drive first, but that's fine. Under memory information, there we are. We do have our 128 megabytes of SD RAM running at 100 megahertz with 1 megabyte of video memory, it states. Okay, go down to our CPU information. So we do have CPU speed is set to normal. What options does it give us? Compatible and normal. Those are the two things it gives us. Our bus speed's 100 megahertz. It doesn't give me an option to do anything there to change it. I wonder if I change this. No, okay, I was just wondering if I could change it any. We have processor ID, clock speed, and our cache size. Integrated devices, so legacy set options. So we do have our sound on, mouse on, USB emulation. So this is where you go and tweak all the different I/O on the back. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that I noticed it didn't have any front I/O, which is, you know, something we've come to in this era really came to adapt to by having front USB, for example, or front audio. Our IRQ assignments, IRQ reservations, and system security, pretty straightforward stuff. So all this would have been saved and running just fine because, again, that coin cell is fine. I'm wondering if this computer was tossed because of that power supply problem. And you saw how easy it was for me to troubleshoot this and get another power supply installed. We're going to get out of this and see if we can actually boot into an operating system. So we have Windows XP Professional installed on the computer. Classic operating system. Love this operating system. Very, very good. I was on this for many, many, many years before upgrading. We have a couple icons on the desktop, but overall it's fairly clean. So I'm wondering if this was used in some sort of business environment because it does say shortcut to SPOS. So I'm wondering if it's a point of sale system that this would have been used for. Literally a very bare bones installation of Windows XP Professional. Okay, we're going to check out the computer hardware. Before we do that, I did come up with the registered information of the user of the business that was using this, so I can confirm now that this was used in a store environment where this would have been a point of sale system. Okay, I'm going to click on Device Manager and see what we have installed in this computer. So on our disk drives, we have our Quantum Fireball, and that's our 20 gigabyte hard disk. Our display adapter is an integrated controller. It's just an 82810E graphics controller. So, I mean, we see the Intel chip right on the motherboard, the chipset. Again, would you take the time to upgrade this computer using a dedicated graphics card? Depends how far you want to take this with the Celeron CPU. We do have our optical drive, pretty standard stuff going through. Under network adapter, we do have our Realtek. It looks like a 10100 family fast Ethernet card. CPU, of course, we do have our Celeron 1.3 gigahertz CPU. Our sound, which is integrated as well, is an Intel AC97 audio controller, so nothing, pretty run-of-the-mill at the time, and of course our USB controllers. But overall, I mean, the system is extremely snappy. I mean, it doesn't show like there's any issues in terms of the performance. I mean, it's running really, really well because there's probably nothing running on this computer at the moment because it's very basic. Under the SPOS, let's take a look here. So here it is. We do have direct access into the point of sale. And I'm not seeing any sort of PII showing, so as far as I'm going to go, but the fact that, this computer does have all this, I am going to wipe this for the protection of the company and make sure that the drive data is destroyed. Because again, just because this would have customer information potentially, definitely information about the business and things like that. So, but the fact that we can confirm that this computer was a point of sale computer. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I'm wondering if the only reason it was tossed was because of the power supply, and that seems to be the only problem with this system number one. Back to what we're talking about here when we normally do these types of videos. System number one, fully operational, not seeing any issues with any of the capacitors. The RAM is obviously functioning correctly. The CPU is running correctly. It was just a bad power supply. And overall, again, the board seems to be really good shape. It just needs to be definitely some cleaned up done around the CPU area because of the airflow and the dust that is in there. Okay, so successful. System number one is functioning. Let's take a look at system number two. Okay, here we are with system number two. We have a different type of form factor again. Another Dell. We have an Optiplex GX270 desktop tower system. Because it does have the feet on the bottom, so you can stand it up if you want. And you can see the orientation of the case badges as well in that design, but also the fact that it can be laid this way. And again, these are built so well that these at the time could have no problem having a CRT sitting right on top of them, of course, before we switch to the more flat designs. Okay, in the front we also have this little door that flips up, which is notorious on Dell systems. So we do have two USB as well as two front audio accessible, front IO, which is great. We do have, it looks like, another DVD ROM written on the front of this optical drive and another floppy in the front. We do have design for Windows XP, and this time we do have Intel Inside Pentium 4, so we'll see what's installed in the computer. Okay, here's the back of the Dell. We do have our printer port, our serial, and our integrated graphics. Of course, we do have our two PS2 ports. In this case, we have 6 USB ports, which is nice to see. Built-in Ethernet, as well as our integrated audio, and of course our power supply. And this one might be a little more proprietary because of the form factor of the chassis. Now, of course, I do see a missing expansion card that, well, the plate's not there. So I'm making the assumption that there was a card that was in this system and it has been removed. And here we are with the system all opened up. It is a clamshell design. We have just basically the tower just levers open, kind of like that V as I was talking about earlier. So we do have our IDE ribbon cable. So we have our optical drive sitting up here with our audio connected, our IDE, as well as our power. And we do have a hard disk installed. I'm not exactly sure what hard disk is installed just yet. Now, the nice thing about Dell is they make this very, well, I say that, but let's say they make it quite easy to remove, given the green indicators that it is user accessible. So there we are. So we have the drive out, and let's take a look at it. It's a Barracuda 7200 RPM drive, 40 gigabyte. There's nothing written on here that is any sort of personal information, so I'm not too worried about that. But again, it being a POS probably indicates what this system was used for. Okay, let's pop it back in, and at least that way we can see if the system will at least power up. Let's get our power back plugged back in. So we do have that IDE ribbon cable coming from that hard disk as well, running to the motherboard. We also have this other ribbon cable running to, looks like the card, the controller card that runs the USB and the front audio. We do have an intrusion switch that's activated here. So we do have these two wires, but we do have the switch. So it lets everybody know, or lets the user know, that the system was in fact opened. There's our optical audio cable. And because of the design of the motherboard and the compactness of it, we do have all the ribbon cables plugged into the edge of the card. So they're kind of like on a 90-degree angle out so that you can plug everything in that direction. So we have our power supply, and our power supply runs from the back all the way to the front of the, or sorry, from the front all the way to the back of the case. So definitely very proprietary to Dell in this particular case. Not sure about the pinout of the ATX power supply. We do have our 4-pin CPU power supply sitting over here that, you know, everyone knows how much I love for getting those. But yeah, I mean, we do have those populated. Again, hopefully that power supply spins up. The coin cell this time is a Panasonic CR2032, but I'm not seeing any date code on it this time, so I'm not sure when that may have been replaced. We do have 4 banks of memory this time, though, which is nice. In this particular case, we do have 512 megabytes of DDR memory, so I'm curious to see if we do have the full gigabyte in here. So pop that back in. And I'm not cleaning anything right now, so I'm not going to spray any contact cleaner in there. But yeah, so we do have our full gigabyte of memory installed, which is nice, especially DDR memory. I don't have a little piles of that, so it's nice to have that populated. Now, I will say I am noticing some capacitor issues. There's definitely some capacitors that are bulging. This one here in particular, I don't know if you can see that on camera. Yeah, you can see that. It's right there. So we do have that one that's bulging pretty well. I'm just looking around to see if I see any further ones. Oh, yes. Yes. Oh, my. Okay. I'm going to see if I can pop off. See, I don't want to pop off the CPU. So under the CPU, I'll see if I can get the camera oriented so you guys can see the bad capacitors here. Here we are. Okay, so you can see right in here, there's a pile of bad capacitors. That's not dirt. That's actually bad caps. And it goes all the way over to the edge over here along the back. So there's capacitors lining all the way around. And as I've mentioned in several videos before, the capacitors that are really close to the CPU tend to have the most stress on them because of the heat that surrounds them. And in this particular case, this is no exception. They are definitely in bad shape. I don't think any are blown, but they're definitely bulging and leaking. I'm going to take my chances again. This was E-Way, so I'm going to take my chances, power it on, because heck, you know, what's a little smoke show for some fun? But essentially, I'm going to see what we can do to get this up and running. But you can see why it's important to check these things out when you get these systems, just to make sure that you're aware of this. I'm going to see if this system powers up long enough to see if it actually functions. And if not, if it doesn't work because of this, we can definitely get those replaced. It'll be a fun little project to get this computer up and running. So let's zoom back out and take a look at the rest of the system. Okay, here we are. So we do have an AGP expansion slot here, which is absolutely great to see. Now, just be mindful, you need to get a low profile card because of the form factor of the chassis. And then, of course, we have 2 PCI. You can see one right through here, expansion here as well. And they seem to be full height cards that you can put in, which is really good. Assuming the power supply functions, we're going to see if we can get by with those very bad capacitors, and if not, well, that'll be the end of this machine. But I'm hoping that we are able to get this up and running, at least long enough to say, okay, it is worth salvaging. Okay, I'm going to get the bench all set up, get our monitor, keyboard, and mouse, you know the drill, get it all set up, and see if we can get the system up and running. Okay, so we have our computer all set back up on the bench, and I do have the power plugged in, but as we know, Dells tend to turn on by themselves, and I wanted to catch this on video in case there's any problem. So I do have the power currently unplugged. I'm going to plug it into the power bar in a moment, but this is the area here where you're going to see any smoke come out of here if there's any issues, if one of those capacitors blow, and we get all the wonderful smells that go along with it. Okay, I'm going to plug it in, and we'll see what happens. We we have post. I'm floored by this. We have post. Oh, what is this? We have four capacitors, at least 4 or 5 capacitors in the back there that we saw that absolutely look like garbage, and it's still holding on for dear life. Yeah, I won't run this long because I mean that's just we're on borrowed time with those guys, so we're just going to go into here long enough to get into the configuration to see what we can do to see what's inside this computer. Okay, we are now to the configuration screen. So we do have our Intel Pentium 4 CPU running at 2.4 gigahertz with 512 kilobytes of level 2 cache, and of course we have our BIOS. Interesting, the service tag is not listed. So we have our system date and time, which is absolutely incorrect. So that coin cell is not holding the configuration. Drive configuration, it is showing diskette A is 3.5 inch. And of course, we have our primary and our secondary drives set to appropriately with hard drive and our CD-ROM drive. So memory information, we do have our gigabyte of DDR RAM, which we saw inside, with running at 266 megahertz with dual channel mode, which is great. And our CPU information, which we saw earlier, bus speeds at 800 megahertz, running at 2.4 gigahertz for our clock speed. Okay, and we saw all this a few moments ago in the other system, and pretty straightforward. It's interesting that the asset tag is not listed though, so I'm curious what is causing that issue. So I'm going to hit escape and see if we actually are able to boot into any sort of operating system. Okay, so we do have Windows XP running so far. Possible we have 2 for 2 systems. I mean, one was a power supply problem, and this one clearly has capacitor issues. And we're still able to boot. So let's see what happens here. Sure enough, there's that same SPOS software that we saw earlier. So again, I expect this to be a clean install of Windows based on what we saw on the previous system. Could this have come from the same business? Very possible. There's our start menu. I don't expect to see too much on here. Well, I say that, but there's a lot more on here than there were on the other one. So we do have administrative tools, accessories, AOL, classic phone tools, send and receive a fax. Oh my goodness, Dell. So we have media experience, Dell accessories, Dell Picture Studio, so Paint Shop Pro Studio, support, games, Intel network adapter, Java, Picture It, Microsoft Picture It. Microsoft Works is installed, net waiting. We have Real Player installed. We have Sonic. Oh my goodness, look at all this stuff. Adobe Reader 6. Microsoft Office is installed. MSN. Jeez. Oh my goodness, yeah, definitely interesting to see all the legacy software installed. So this time we don't have any sort of personal information listed on the registered, so I can leave this screen up. We have Dell Dimension 4700, says DIM 4700, Intel Pentium 4 2.4 gigahertz, 1 gig of RAM, XP Home Edition this time installed with Service Pack 2. Under our hardware, we expect to see very similar what we've already reviewed. We do have our disk drive listed. There's our hard disk at 40 gigabyte, which we knew about. And our integrated graphics, nothing fancy, our 82865G graphics controller, but we do have that ability to expand via the AGP if we want to. Continuing on, we have our Ethernet controller, which is not showing any drivers installed. Pentium 4, 2.4 gigahertz. Integrated sound, that's our legacy audio codec, so SoundMax integrated digital audio. And of course, we have our USB, which is pretty standard in this timeline. Again, nothing very fancy to show here. It was a fully working system when it was pulled out of the business. Obviously, if the other power supply went on the other computer, and both are from the same organization, they probably said, I'm just going to replace both systems. But that said, this definitely needs a recap, this motherboard, and I would argue the other system wouldn't hurt from that either. So that might be a cool project to feature in the Retro Recall. All right, so all that said, system number 2 is also functioning. So we have 2 systems up and running now. Can we go for a third? Let's go ahead and find out right now. Okay, here we are with system number 3, and it looks like Old Faithful. I say that because this was the design that I was very commonly seeing in the 2000s, this Dell design. Tried, true, and tested. It was in every business, it seemed, that I went to, every school that I went to had this sort of form factor chassis. One thing I'll mention is I just remembered in the My Computer section of the previous system we were just looking at, it did state on that system, it was Dell Dimension 4700 in that list, which is weird because it was Optiplex GX270. So I'm curious why that was like that. I don't know if they took the the hard disk out of this system and popped it in that computer to get it going. I'm not sure. Either way, it's not correct. So just wanted to call that out because what flagged me on it was the Dell Dimension 4700 written on the front of this computer. Okay, let's keep going. So we do have two optical drives this time. It looks like we have a CDRW drive and we do have a CD drive on the top. We do have a spot what looks like would have been populated, potentially populated with a floppy drive, but it's not currently populated. We do have our power and our hard disk LEDs, our Dell Dimension 4700 moniker with our Dell logo on the front. None of this opens up in the front, but we do have the front I/O. We do have a couple of USB, and we do have audio out in the front. And we do have our design for Windows XP and our Pentium 4 case badges, so that's really good to see. And again, so far we've been pretty good at everything that we've done, showing that that's correct. Basically the case badges are what's installed in the computer in terms of CPUs. And along the back, we do have our power supply. There's that on-off switch that I love so much. We have an extra case fan installed, which is quite dirty, but we do have it installed. We do have our integrated graphics is covered up by this plastic cover, but we are showing a dedicated graphics card down below, which is nice to see. We do have our serial connection, our LPT connection, or parallel connection for our printer. We do have a couple of PS2. This time we do have 5 audio jacks. We have 6 USB, and we also have our integrated network card. But yeah, we do have our 15-pin VGA or DVI. It looks like also S-Video out. So it's interesting to see that video card. I don't know if this would have been added after or that would have been part of the feature set. I'm guessing it's part of the feature set because it does have this cover over it versus, if you were an end user, you wouldn't have these laying around unless it was supplied with the card to pop over your other one. So it kind of just tells the user, hey, don't use this one, plug it in down here. Okay, let's take the side off and take a look inside this computer for hardware. Okay, here we are inside system number 3, and there's a lot going on here compared to the other ones. There's a lot more interesting, that's for sure. So we do have our 2 optical drives up top. They are both, they're both IDE. Interesting enough, though, the top one is not connected by a ribbon cable, just the bottom one. So I don't know what's going on there. And we do have a couple of spare power cords just kind of hanging out. We do have 2 hard disks labeled C and D. It's interesting enough, we do have an IDE as well as a SATA drive here. I don't know exactly what these are. Much harder to get into where they're located to be able to get all this kind of out. So we're going to rely on the system booting to see what we have installed. We have some adapters also installed, obviously to give some expansion to the computer as needed. We do have our CPU power running down, our 4-pin power. This system is looking much better. In terms of the capacitors, they're definitely looking a lot better. Really good shape, actually, compared to the other, well, just really good shape, not just compared to, they are in excellent shape. And I'm looking around, just looking at all the different capacitors. We do have our coin cell, our CR2032. Again, no date installed on this one, so I'm wondering if that is original to the board. We do have our video card that is installed. We're going to take a look at that to see exactly what it is. Yeah, so I'm not seeing any sort of information on this that identifies what this is. I see Samsung memory installed in the card on the PCB. We do have a number here. It says E-G012-04-2366 and B in brackets, and it says 2004. It's not giving me any other information. Usually, it would denote something on the PCB on the silk screen, but I'm not seeing anything printed there. But it is interesting and nice to have that we do have a PCIe installed instead of, I thought it was going to be AGP, to be honest with you. So that's nice to see as well. So it looks like we do have DDR2 256 megabytes of RAM. So it might just be 512 that's installed in this system running in dual channel, but we'll have to take a look at that. It doesn't look like the other 2 were populated, so I'm not worried about anything kind of missing from the computer. But definitely nice to see. And I do like these motherboards that do support the legacy options. So we do have our SATA connections, which is great, and the power supply obviously supporting both. But we also have that IDE ribbon cable connections, as well as the floppy drive ribbon cable connector there as well. We have an Intel chipset that's showing on the board, and 2 additional PCI for expansion amongst some other USB connectors along the bottom that you can potentially hook up additional headers if needed. Okay, I'm going to close this up, close this kind of shroud so we get that back down for ventilation. And we're going to set the bench back up and find out if this computer will post. Okay, here we are with the third system, the much more interesting computer, all ready to go. And when I plugged it in the back, it was quite loud. The extra chassis fan did turn on and it was quite loud, but that's okay. Hopefully the noise canceling helps with some of that. Okay, I'm going to hit the Dimension 4700 power button and see what happens. We are not getting post. Okay, we're getting a couple of long beeps here, and I bet you any money has something to do with the RAM that I removed. Generally, when you disturb memory that's been in the system for a while and pop it back in, it doesn't always make the contact without contact cleaner. The same thing with that PCIe video card. So I'm going to get some contact cleaner and see if I can get those cleaned out so we can get this posting. Okay, here we go. I took a little bit of contact cleaner, sprayed it in all the wonderful RAM slots as well as that PCIe video card just to make sure that we're golden. Let's hit the power button and see what happens this time. And we have post. All right, F2 for setup. Our Dell Dimension 4700 showing on the screen properly this time. Whoa, okay, completely different BIOS. Here we go. Okay, so we have a Dell System 4700. A08 is the BIOS version 2005. Service tag information, all those good things. Processor info. We do have an Intel Pentium 4 running at 2.8 gigahertz this time. We have our 800 megahertz with 1 megabyte of L2 cache, so definitely nice to see. Hyper-threading there as well. We do have, okay, sure enough, we do have 512 megabytes of memory running at 400 megahertz. It is running in dual channel mode. So our date and time is correct. We are scoring on that one for sure. It is detecting the boot sequence under our drives, pretty generic stuff that we have at this point. So under video, we are showing our primary video set to auto, so it'll automatically determine what video controller to utilize. Generally, we'll use the expansion first and then go from there. And under our performance, we're just set to hyper-threading's turned on, HDD or hard disk acoustic mode is bypassed currently, which is set to do nothing, needed for older drives, which is fine. We don't touch security or power management. Okay, so we're pretty good here. So we do see what this computer is all about. Let's hit escape, and we're going to exit and see if it actually boots into an operating system. And again, Windows XP, so 3 computers, all 3 were able to get up and running, all 3 running Windows XP. Okay, so we are to the desktop. I had to cut a bit of footage out because it automatically loaded up with a point of sale system that was logged in, showing a pile of customer information. So again, I will delete all of that data off of this computer, and that way we don't have to worry about any of that and protect the customer's identities. But we have a fully functioning system from Dell. Now this one of the 3 is much more exciting, which I think just because of the dedicated graphics, definitely a lot more expansion possibilities with the different ports on the motherboard, additional memory for sure it can support, and the PCI Express video card definitely makes this a really cool Pentium 4 system. So it does show Microsoft Windows XP Home Edition Service Pack 2. We have our Dell Dimension 4700, and this is what I was talking about earlier about how the other computers showed the same thing, so I'm wondering if there was a drive swap at one point. And we have our Pentium 4 2.8 gigahertz with our 512 megabytes of memory. Under our hardware, let's go through quickly our display adapters. There we go. So we do have our Radeon X300 series is what we have installed in this computer. I don't know much about this video card, so let me know down in the comments if it's a decent video card or not. I mean, obviously I can do my research on it, but again, I rely on you guys, the community who uses these cards. So continuing on, we have our Intel Pro 100, so 10100 network card. Looks like it's disabled currently. CPU is our Intel Pentium 4, which is hyper-threaded, showing 2 of them here. Our sound card is showing our integrated SoundMax digital audio. And of course, we have our USB all installed. And let's go up to the top here. We have our optical drive, just our standard CDRW it's detecting, because remember I said that one was already unplugged. And our disk drives, we have, it looks like a Seagate and a Western Digital. It looks like an 80 gig. And is this a 30 or a 20 gig? Let's take a look. So we have an 80 gig and a 20 gig drive that's installed on this computer. Okay, yeah, outside of that, we do have 3 systems working. All right, I think this is definitely a success. So system number 3 up and running. Let's go to our outro. And here we are at the end of the video with our 3 Dell systems, all 3 functioning. I was gonna say fully functioning is a bit loose because of some of the issues. So we do know that the Dell Dimension 2200 in this interesting design, which again, as I noted, I haven't seen before, is bad, has a bad power supply. We know that has a bad power supply. We swapped it out. But we were able to get it up and running, no problem. We do have this Dell or Optiplex GX270 that has capacitors that are just screaming, saying, "Put me out of my misery," because they are just so bad. We do need to get those replaced in this system. But again, these two systems don't really offer a lot of expansion. This does have that AGP slot if we wanted to, but you're definitely limited by the low profile design of the chassis in this particular case. And then over here, we do have Old Faithful. I say Old Faithful because, again, this is the design that you notoriously thought about of the era of these Dells. It is a Dell Dimension 4700. And in this particular case, specifically, if this was back in the day, is no slouch. I mean, having that dedicated PCIe expansion slot is amazing. Having the 4 banks for memory for our DDR2, the Pentium 4 2.8 gigahertz, I can see this really turning into a retro gaming PC myself. The capacitors themselves even look really good. Plus, you have the ability to use the SATA and the IDE connections for the hard disk storage, as well as if you wanted to upgrade to, like, say, an SSD and things like that. This gives you a lot more expansion capabilities, even in a Pentium 4. But overall, having all 3 systems, I would say these are all Dell-lites for sure, and not all trash. Again, it all depends on what your view is of this era of computing, and Dell's, of course. But I will say, one thing you can't take away from Dell of this era is how well they were built, how sturdy they were built, and how much abuse they could take. That said, if you liked today's video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Makes a world of difference, helps this channel grow. Hit the notification button, change it to all. You'll be notified of new content such as this. Please leave a comment down below. Did you own any of these computers? What do you think we should do with these systems? Please let me know. I love hearing all your comments. I respond to absolutely every one of them. Always making new content. We'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.